I had a friend who said, oh, it's like being in an alien video game. And I thought, yeah, that's actually really accurate. I think DMT is a lot like being in an alien video game, but being in a video game means you are, it's agentic. You're moving around, you're interacting with entities, you're in an altered state, but you're still on your own journey as a human being, to understand and connect and be. We had a whole conversation about the symbol specifically, and Andrew Gallimore was pointing out that this is a common phenomena, and people see these very specific symbols. I see them all the time. I see these, what I would say like similar to Mayan hieroglyphs. I almost see them as like the language of that realm, so what does that mean? Don't know. Now I could extrapolate onto that. I do think there's a fundamental truth. I'm not a relativist.
Welcome back to the transmission, my friends. The frontiers of consciousness are there for all of us to explore. Though, as you know, if you've ever explored that territory, it is intense. It is unpredictable. It is utterly alien stuff. Moreover, as powerful, profound, and transformative as these experiences are, they seem to be fundamentally interwoven with like the trickster's will, some intelligence, some presence. Every time I go even remotely deep, seems to almost take pleasure in just fiddling with all of my knobs and levers, the whole switchboard of my being. So in my experience, it's hard. It's hard to know what it all means. It's hard to know where the borders of your consciousness and other consciousnesses begin. It's hard to know what to believe. It's hard to know what to do with any of it. Which is why I deeply value the souls who are, one, willing to be courageous enough to traverse that territory again and again, and two, actually maintain some degree of level-headedness, are actually able to return from such confusing, trickster, booby-trapped territory with a modicum of real medicine that is not overly spiked with Delulu. And that is why I appreciate Alexander Beiner so much. Ali is an author, philosopher, and seeker who is interested in psychedelics, meaning making, and systems change. He also participated in the world's first extended state DMT study at Imperial College, London, which puts him in some truly rarefied psychonautic territory. He's the co-founder of Rebel Wisdom, which used to be one of my favorite YouTube channels when it was active. He's got a new project, Kainos, which I've been a guest on. He's also the author of The Bigger Picture, How Psychedelics Can Help Us Make Sense of the World. He has a fantastic Substack. I just deeply enjoy and appreciate melding minds with him every single time. Speaking of which, let's do it. But first, all the links that you will need for both Alexander and Third Eye Drops are in the description. If you would be so kind, do me a favor, tickle the algorithm, like, sub, comment, share. Do subscribe to Third Eye Drops wherever you listen to podcasts. We've got hundreds of audio-only mind melds with some truly brilliant beings. And I suppose this remains big news. We have a YouTube members channel now, so you are going to get 2 pieces of members-only content a month if you sign up. So initiate yourself there or over at patreon.com/Third Eye Drops. You will get the same content, and depending on your pledge level, you can get other rewards. We have a patron-only Discord server, and you can get stickers, pins, shirts, and more. I actually just published a full members-only mind meld over 90 minutes with my dear wonderkin Molly Adler of the Back from the Borderline podcast. We've got a members-only dream analysis with Eric Godsey. But anyway, speaking of melding minds, let's do so with Alexander Beiner. One of my favorite people to commune with. What was it? Is it 1 kilometer under the pyramid of Khufu, or is it 2 kilometers? I forget. I forget how many kilometers deep it is. But however many feet it is, kilometers, meters, it is.
Leagues.
Yeah.
Just gonna throw in measurements. Yeah.
I shouldn't have brought that up because I have like everyone been interested in that from a distance, but I don't have an informed opinion on that topic, other than it is obviously super fucking fascinating. But other than that, I haven't like done my due diligence on like going through the study and like studying what the skeptics think about it. But yeah, I mean, how can you not find it novel?
Yeah, it is fascinating. I've done the very early bits of due diligence, but not enough to have a formed opinion. I've read the skeptics, and then now usually my next step would be, okay, let's read the counterpoints to that, and let's look at the different contexts. So I'm way behind in terms of that. But I'm fascinated, and would love to see a movie of, obviously, of people sort of drilling down into the earth and having some kind of strange Stargate style encounter.
Yeah. Anybody who can make LiDAR data more exciting, or there is a lot of seemingly interesting tales from antiquity of people who claim to have been, in various mysterious underground locations in ancient Egypt. So clearly there's a lot going on underground there, I think. I don't think that's controversial to say, but yeah, man, God, if that's true, the the epistemic impact is going to be immense. And I don't even know how we'll ever prove if it is true, because I can't imagine that if it is true, or even if there is like a decent likelihood of it being true, that they would allow whatever would need to be done to prove it. I don't know. There's
Yeah.
maybe I've consumed too much Graham Hancock in my life or something, but I just have this sense that it's like the authorities there, are like clinging to their version of history. But I don't know. Who knows, man? Who knows?
We'll see. We'll see. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, just the logistical operation of digging up that much, I mean, earth, and I don't know. Yeah, it would be, but it's a strange time to be alive, man. You never know what mad stuff might transpire.
Yeah. And okay, so speaking of weird times to be alive, I mean, that statement right there could just fractal out into God knows where. But specifically, like, as we've talked about in the past, we're living in a time where, not only are we in this sort of cultural psychedelic renaissance, and air quotes, a phrase that's been way over prostituted out, but it is true to some degree for sure. And you have this really, you're at the nexus of that in a lot of interesting ways, as somebody who's a content creator, an author, a philosopher, but also an experiencer. And not just an experiencer, but an experiencer that has done the most intense possible initiations into some of these states of consciousness through university intravenous transfusions of DMT and 5-MeO DMT. We've talked a lot about your NN-DMT experience, which is just, sounds as ontologically impactful as anything could possibly be. Like,
Hmm.
beings and so many other things. But since we've explored that story, pretty significantly at this point, I wanted to go back to your other story about 5-MeO, because you also did an extended state 5-MeO.
Not extended state.
Not extended state.
No, just regular. But well, not regular. Intranasal. It's like an intranasal spray.
Okay.
Yeah. Which was, no one to my knowledge is doing extended state 5-MeO, which would, well, maybe someone out there is planning on it. I mean, it would be I think it would be ontologically potentially dangerous, because, NN-DMT is, like Rick Strassman described it, it's a prophetic experience. So you retain your agency. I had a friend who said, the first time she did it, she was like, oh, it's like being in an alien video game. And I thought, yeah, that's actually really accurate. I think DMT is a lot like being in an alien video game, but being in a video game means you are, it's agentic. You're moving around, you're interacting with entities, you're in an altered state, but you're still on your own journey as a human being, to kind of understand and connect and be. And 5-MeO DMT, firstly, I think it's fascinating that they're so different to one another.
Right.
They're both, although, say, there's a lot of psychedelic molecules which are, tryptamines or phenethylamines, for example, these two kind of like main classes of psychedelic molecule, tryptamines being like LSD and psilocybin, and phenethylamines being like MDMA and, well, which isn't a pathogen, but San Pedro or peyote. And like all the tryptamines, for someone who's not a chemist, when I look at the chemical structure of them, I see a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
LSD is very complex, but if you look at like serotonin, psilocybin, LSD, you see there's like a core, and DMT, there's a core pattern with a few variations around it. It's not like something radically different. Like you look at Iboga, it looks completely different.
Right.
It's to the layperson like me, I look at it and I'm like, okay, that's, I don't know what's going on there. And so, but that being said, the fact that an NDMT is this powerful prophetic experience, and 5-MeO is this non-dual, white-out, sort of deep emptiness, not experience, is fascinating to me. It's just really, really interesting. And and so Imperial College, where I did the intravenous and NDMT, they also were running a 5-MeO study where it wasn't intravenous, but was intranasal. So quite a different way than I've done it before, where most of the time people vaporize it.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, beautiful, and it was, but very challenging in the sense that like when so they ask you through the headphones in the NN-DMT study. They had this study design where they would say like, anxiety level 0 to 10. And it was a little bit like, it was very doable to sort of decenter, sort of take a step back from my experience, check in with myself, and then just give an answer out loud and then just go right back into the trip. Like if I was playing a video game and someone was like, how are you feeling right now? 0 to 10. I'd be like, 8. I'd be like, okay, cool. I'm still in the game.
Yeah.
But in the 5-MeO experience, the effect it had on me, at least, was that I was relaxing into, let's say the ocean of being, a kind of like dropping into a, merged, more non-dual experience. And then the question in the headphones being like, ego dissolution, 0 to 10. I was like, what? Like,
yeah.
And I had a big discussion.
And until you started talking to me. Yeah.
Yeah, it was exactly that. And I had a big discussion with them afterwards where I said, like, just kind of, I have a critique of the construct. I actually have a critique of the construct of ego death itself, which I've written about in a piece called The Ego Doesn't Die on my Substack, if people want to check that out, because it's kind of a bugbear of mine, where I think it's more useful to talk about ego reframing or ego recontextualizing. So it's like, because, for example, who is the me answering the question? I'm a meditator as well, so I get that there's an aspect of me observing. However, I would argue that aspect of me that's observing my conscious mind is so much me that it's not useful to talk about it as like ego. Oh, that's my deeper self paying attention to my ego. Yeah, cool, fine. But when I do that, you don't see it, you don't experience it. It's not, it doesn't leave the confines of my own conscious experience. So not to say potentially that we can't, there's these examples of, there's a lot of examples in psychedelic experiences of people becoming other people, or Chris Beisch, who wrote LSD in the Mind of the Universe, just literally becoming every woman who's ever suffered, or every child who's ever suffered, or that's an interesting phenomenon. Though I would say at the same time, his experience of that didn't sort of cascade a global experience of that. That was he had to write a book to describe the experience, right? So there's something about the construct that I question. And, I was like, exactly like we were just saying, who is the me answering the question? And it got into a whole like philosophical debate after the dosing. And it kind of pissed me off, because I was like, maybe just don't ask me questions. I get it. It's a study. I get it. But it's tricky like that, right? So, I mean, it raises a lot of interesting, philosophical questions, though. That very thing of like, can your ego dissolve, so to speak, or can your ego recontextualize itself in a greater whole while you are self-referencing in the process?
Totally.
I don't know. Maybe depends how high the dose is, probably.
Yeah, there's something fundamentally ironic about trying to create abstractions out of a experience that is so hyper personal and hyper, like, all the qualia is just hypercharged to a level where it's beyond description, beyond language, and then you come right out of the experience and you're like, okay, put it into language, which fundamentally does violence to the reality of whatever it is. And I would imagine it might actually create more difficulty integrating the truth about whatever it is you experience because you immediately have to, capture it with language. I guess you could argue either way on that, but it reminds me of like, so totally different example, but I've been reading Invisible College by Jacques Vallée, who, he's a prolific phenomena researcher. Most people would call him a UFO researcher, but he really looks at the phenomenon much more like Jung did, where
Mm.
he's not trying to, reduce it down to simply atmospheric phenomena or nuts and bolts or whatever. He's fully acknowledging that there are dimensions to the phenomena at large that cannot be empirically captured. And clearly that could not be more true when it comes to a significant psychedelic experience. Like there are just so many elements of that experience. Like I'm almost cringing at myself saying this because it's so obvious. And like anybody who's had a philosophical conversation about psychedelics realizes this almost instantly, but that just speaks to how true it is. And I would think it's even more true when you're in an academic environment. You're trying to boil it down to academic categories, right? Like there's something, I don't know, man. There's just something about the acquisition of knowledge in this area specifically that I think in some ways science has a very limited way of interfacing with.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I always think of this metaphor that is, I think, a Zen metaphor. I certainly came across it through that practice of, imagining like you cupping water in your hands, like, you have this beautiful water,
Yeah.
and it's just reflecting beautifully the sky, and it's just exactly as it is. And then as soon as you try and grasp it, it just disappears, And so that's like, there is something of trying to abstract this deep qualitative experience, which not only doesn't capture it, but also you lose something as the person experiencing it. You lose something immediately by trying to categorize it. There's almost like a piece of
Right.
magic that's kind of left. I've noticed this since my first psychedelic experiences. I was a writer before I was a psychonaut. I've always, since I was like 11 or 12, I just wanted to write. And so I've always been, writing about experiences and writing in general. And so, I've always been fascinated with the idea of how do you capture the experience in language. And you obviously can't capture the experience, but you can create art out of it in some sense, and through language. So you can have a sense of, and, you can use narrative, etc. But even in that process, you never capture the experience. And this is true of, poets say this as well, not, it doesn't have to be related to psychedelics, and the romantic poets, and that was their experience or their spiritual practice, or, if you could call it that, of going into nature or looking at beautiful, incredible art in Italy and having an experience of the sublime. So the sublime being this moment where your categories fail and you're just in awe. And it wipes out. It's a bit like, there is something 5-MeO like about that experience, or vice versa. There's an erasing, a kind of a wiping clean of every conceit and every strategy and every sense of categorizing reality into just the thing itself, just the isness of it,
Yeah.
And so, these deep encounters with nature, can do that. And I think, something like 5-MeO can also do that. But then, of course, the irony is, as you're speaking to, trying to then categorize the uncategorizable and to F the ineffable, as who was it that said that? There's an author who said that, I think, but I love that phrase, right?
It sounds like something McKenna would say, but I'm sure.
Yeah, it is. It might
F the ineffable.
F
You
the
can't
ineffable.
F the
Yeah, it's McKenna. I think it was Tom Robbins, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the author. I think it was him. But so there is something, and I found it more difficult with the 5-MeO experience. Like in the NN-DMT experience, we would do this microphenomenology, it's called, which I found really helpful, where right after the experience, it was usually Lisa Luan who was doing the study. She would just kind of go, okay, minute 1 to minute 40. Okay, so we just go through it as if you're there and you're not overlaying meaning. You're not trying to make sense of it. You just talk about what's happening. And it's great to do, I think, with any psychedelic experience, because you replay it. And in fact, in LSD in the Mind of the Universe, he used to do this after his trips. Chris Bache would do this. He'd sit with the same playlist and go through it. And I've noticed
that makes sense.
like it's really effective. Like after, I used to run psychedelic retreats, and this is something that we would recommend. It wasn't always possible, like during the retreat to do like, okay, we're gonna do a whole like 8 hours of the exact same thing. But as a, to give people the playlist and encourage them to just like do that at home, even just sit and be in the experience again, because it helps you process in new ways.
Totally makes sense.
It's
yeah.
really, really useful. But there's something about the 5-MeO experience which is, different to that. And I'm by no means an expert. I've only done it twice, once elsewhere, much higher dose. Well, I don't know if it was, I felt like a higher dose. And then once at Imperial. But, others, I was told that others who had the dose I had at Imperial, this intranasal, they were like totally gone with it. And so I wonder if I was in a space of frustration with the study design, and I was kind of preventing. I was like, no, like I can't. I get into a bit of a loop of being a bit pissed off with it. So, but the first experience I had was very profound and annihilating, I would say.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, the disembodied intellect of McKenna spoke to me, and it wanted me to say, well, I can guarantee that the more you try to F the ineffable, the more it will F you. That's what he wanted me to say. The second thing is we've already kind of given an outline, but I really want you to, if you can, I mean, this is literally flying right in the face of what we said before, but if you can generally try to explain this absolutely self-negating or self-transformational experience of just becoming this unitive cloud of consciousness that feels at one with everything in totally un-Alexandered, what is that like? And second, I just want to acknowledge that this idea that bits of uncapturable numinosity hang on to the music playlist that you use for a tripping is so true, man. There's one song in particular that I listen to on a heroic dose of mushrooms that I cannot listen to. Like it absolutely it just destroys me, dude. I like, no matter where I am or what I'm doing, I will just start weeping right away.
Wow.
Like I'll send it to you if you want to hear it, but there's just something so absolutely devastating about that song that just, reduced me to just this like blubbering puddle during a trip. And like every time I even hear the first couple notes, I'm just like, nope. And I just have to skip right over it.
Of course, I have to hear it now.
Yeah.
It's obviously not going to have the same. Amazing if it did have the same impact. If you've had this kind of, you'd imbued it with a mimetic quality through the morphogenic field, and then it.
At the same time, I think anybody who's really gone to the like deep archetypal sadness for the suffering of the world, which is probably almost everybody who's had a really significant psychedelic experience. Like that's one of the dimensions that you get pulled into, that for whatever reason, that song just like takes me right into that energy.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh no.
Wow. Beautiful. I mean,
I guess.
I have those songs as well. Not quite pulling me into that space, but I mean, it's incredibly powerful. Smells as well. Underrated,
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a fun phrase in general. Smells are underrated.
Smells are I didn't mean in psychedelics. I just meant in general. People should smell more.
Nobody walks around being like, dude, remember when we smelled that burger last week? Oh my.
Listen, man, all the kids are on TikTok and hitting their vapes. No one's sniffing anymore, No one's just smelling stuff.
It's too subtle, man. It's probably the most high art of all the senses, It's like the most underappreciated, most subtle, most sophisticated.
Yeah, it is. It's a weird one. So there was a question though, wasn't there? Yes.
Yeah.
So the
trying to language the 5-MeO.
Trying to language the 5-MeO. So, okay. So while I was looking up a quote from William James as you were talking, because I find he did a great job of this. But so for me, I find it more useful to frame my experiences in terms of time and infinity. Like there's something of because what I notice is that it's often described in terms of identity. like, ego death or ego dissolution. It's like, okay, yeah, that's certainly one frame we can look at it through. And we can also look at it through the frame of, kind of existence and timelessness, infinity. Like, we don't experience infinity as human beings. Everything is finite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything we experience, everything to do with matter is finite. And for me, those experiences with 5-MeO and also with nitrous, which I think is as powerful, I would argue. It's incredibly powerful and, again, underrated. No smell. I don't think it has a smell. Does it have a scent? I don't know.
I don't know either.
But there's something of encountering the infinite, and my experience of it is like a kind of like an erasing of anything that's not infinite, which is, my perception in that moment. There's an awareness, otherwise it's dissociation. Otherwise I couldn't tell you anything about it. And this is actually one of my points I make in that article, is like, what's the difference between ego dissolution and dissociation? Because we can have general anesthetic. You could say that's an ego death. Right. Well, I wasn't there, but there's no you there to not be there, so that we're talking about like a different thing. So in these experiences, there is a you there to be there, but that the you is not finite. You are, or certainly my experience of it is being immersed and embedded in the infinite. And that means that there's layers that go infinitely down. And it's like death as well, I guess. I don't know if it's like death, but it has a quality of death to it.
It seems like
yeah, like a kind of like going down to a point of infinity. And so this William James quote, and William James, if people aren't familiar, one of the fathers of psychology, but also did an awful lot of nitrous oxide.
Yeah, and deeply explored mysticism and spirit. Yeah.
So what he so there's this quote from him. He says, "There are no differences, but differences of degree between different degrees of difference and no difference." So
that sounds like something McKenna would say too.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, and it's funny because I have basically I read that once years and years ago after doing nitrous, and I immediately got it. And I now can't explain how I got it, but it's kind of gobbledygook a bit.
Can you say it one more time?
Yeah, I'll read it again. So there are no differences, but differences of degree between different degrees of difference and no difference.
Dude, that sounds like a Zen koan, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the thing. What it points to is something kind of almost Taoist, where there's kind of opposite poles. Difference implies something that is not the other thing.
Yeah.
And there's these poles, but almost these experiences, these non-dual experiences, I think, can take us between the poles, so that we get into, and this is why, like, we get into the point that implies both points, right? So there's like like a third contextual something there which contains everything else. And that's why I think there's a lot of confusion ontologically with the 5-MeO experience and any non-dual experience in the West, because Eastern traditions, for example, who which have been eliciting these states for a long time, they have very, very detailed, deep philosophical structures around them, and how not to fall into various epistemological traps that you can come out of them with. I have a friend who's doing Nana, who's doing a PhD in exactly this, in sort of like Eastern practices and psychedelics. And she points this out a lot. It's like there's a deep kind of philosophical inquiry that goes along with, okay, what did you notice in that meditation? Right. Okay, well, I noticed that I was completely erased. I'd be like, okay, what do you mean by being erased? Who is erasing you? Oh, I don't really think anyone was erasing you. It's okay, well, like, let's rephrase, so there's a deep philosophical, like, we have that tradition in the West as well. But I think sometimes what I notice in, like, after people's 5-MeO experiences is that it's very challenging to integrate the non-dual experience into life, because it can lead to nihilism, and it can also lead to narcissism, where it's just like, well, nothing really matters, and therefore I can do whatever I want, or nothing really matters, and therefore the world is an empty, bare place, or society is so completely blind and backward and only I see the truth. Can go to all those, and I've been in my younger years, I've been in all those positions at some point. I've been like, and so there's so it's like the non-duality has to include duality within it. Otherwise, it's not really non-duality. And so there shouldn't really be a
That's
conflict, I
crazy.
think,
Yeah.
between coming out of a big experience like that and then going to the supermarket and buying milk, because it's like, yeah, this is as real and as it, like, duality implies and allows non-duality to exist. They can't exist without one another. And the last thing I'll say on that is like, this is just coming to me because I've been researching this a lot. Like in the West, and not just in the West, but like 3,000 years ago or so, there was a big religious revolution, the Axial Age revolution, where we went through a process, partly because of the development of alphabetic writing and coinage, where we had this kind of second order thinking, it's called, right? So we were able to think about thinking. We were able to like imagine things in our head that weren't happening. We could have debates with people. In the documentary I'm working on, John Vervaeke describes this beautifully and just kind of maps out like how this is, it's part of the origins of the meaning crisis. And so we moved from this kind of one world cosmology, in which non-dualism fits pretty nicely. You can kind of, I think you can really kind of place it in there. It's like, yeah, there's a single emerging cosmos that I'm part of and it's predestined, and it's all here at once. We moved to a two-world cosmology where we had, actually, this isn't the real world, because we can abstract. Like this world is full of suffering and pain. The real world is somewhere we need to self-transcend to reach. So Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism as well. We had all these religions kind of grew out of that. And so I think that's so deeply part of our cultural grammar and cultural programming that when we have these non-dual experiences, I think we're automatically trying to go, but how do I fit that into my progress narrative? Like, where does that, because that's what we're all about. We're like, how do I get to the future? Like, where is this relationship going? Where am I going to be in 5 years? It's fascinating. As I've been researching this, it's fascinating to listen to all, like mine included, like all of our kind of cultural value systems. I spoke to a friend the other day, and I think he said something like, but like, that's a difficult situation, but the most important thing is that it's always moving forward. I was like, that's literally so second nature to us. But if you've spoken to someone in the Bronze Age and been like, hey, is it important that your life's moving forward? They might have been like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, this is a deep, continuous cycle. The future has already happened.
Would they even have a concept of the future? Like, would they even, I
don't know. I mean, so or it would have been very different to ours, because ours is this mysterious point that we're trying to transcend and reach. And so I think non-dualism is really difficult to fit into that, because it's so dualistic. It's an incredibly dualistic world that we're part of. So I think that's actually interesting. I hadn't actually put those two and two together before, but I think that's a reason, a part of it.
Yeah, there's so much there, man. From what you were saying about like the necessity of dualism and concept to bring value to anything, whether or not this is just as real as that non-dual terminus that you can reach in mystical experiences, not just through 5-MeO DMT. I mean, this is really samadhi, right? Like that's by definition what samadhi is. And the Neoplatonists talk about it. This is like the Tohen of the Platonists, what the pinnacle of what Plotinus would talk about in his mystical experiences. So I'm going to sidestep the question of like what's more real, because who cares? That's just like philosophical masturbation. But I think regardless, like where it's going to shake out is like the carton of milk at the grocery store, whether it is as ontologically real as that experience, it's just as valuable, if not more so, to your present circumstance and your everyday reality. So it almost doesn't matter. Like it's kind of like getting into some conversation about the Matrix, right? Is it's like, guess what? When we're done with this conversation, you'll still be in the Matrix. So so like
I totally agree.
I'm a total hypocrite for saying that, because I love having conversations of that nature. But this, I'm thinking of this right now too, is we were talking about this idea a while ago of synthemata, which is like, it's this Greek word that means like symbol, basically, and the word symbolon is kind of interchangeable with it in certain contexts, which is where the word symbol comes from. But the idea was that the world has these like divine signatures all over it, and things belong in these sort of like archetypal buckets. Like this, like a very obvious one is like the sunflower is a synthema of the sun, and it literally, like, if you sped up what a sunflower does, it and this is a, I believe this is a Proclus quote, um this, that idea that everything worships in its appropriate nature, right? So the
Totally.
way that a sunflower worships is it blossoms, it looks just like the sun, and if you sped it up, you'd see it circling, following the sun, right? Um,
It's cool.
but we were talking about this idea that DMT seems to be some kind of synthemata of something, like that it is like this just pure distillation of some kind of um mode of consciousness, truth about reality, realm, whatever you want to call it. um and I think for like some kind of like shorthand, what's the fancy word for shorthand people like to use? Can't think of it.
Heuristic.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, so like a short, maybe we could say it's like it's a portal to like the astral,
Yeah,
others,
yeah.
like hidden realm or something. Now, what do you think it seems like 5-MeO then would be a synthemata or portal to or route to, I guess, the one, right? Like the one, the
Yeah.
emptiness, the I don't know, what word do you
Yeah. I
think
was gonna
does
say
the least violence
pleroma,
to it?
the Greek.
Oh yeah, that too. The
Yeah, right. That's
fullness.
like,
Yeah, the fullness.
yeah, the fullness. Yeah, because it's like it's a bit like the Heart Sutra in Buddhism. It's like, form is emptiness and emptiness is form.
Oh
It's
yeah.
simultaneously both. And so, yeah, I would agree. I think it is like, say, a portal to that place. And there's it's Trish Blaine, who I've been working with for years, who is a real expert in altered states. She has this model called the four forces, where she looks at kind of like kind of basic desires and how they then also kind of translate to state experiences. And um, the way she describes the 5-MeO experience is that it's like, so one of the forces is connection. So like connection experiences are like, connection is one of the key desires that we have to connect and to merge with one another, with reality. Buddhism and meditation is a connection. These are connection practices, right? I'm trying to merge. I'm trying to let go of my individuality and become one with everything else. And the 5-MeO experience is kind of a pinnacle of that, where but there's no movement in it. You don't move. You can't. There's no creativity or expression. So another one of the forces is expression. Another one is growth. There's none of that, right? There's no, and purpose is the next one. And so there's just pure connection, just stillness. There's nothing moving. There's just isness, the thing
Wow.
itself. Beautiful, right? And that can be very healing. My wife is a psychedelic researcher and is doing, I think even today, or even maybe as we speak, 5-MeO and depression study,
Oh wow.
because it has effects. If you can just have that ontological break from yourself, I think that can have a profound effect. So that experience is one type of spiritual mystical experience. But the prophetic experience of an NDMT, that's like a purpose expression. Like it's about, like, that's why people come out of ayahuasca journeys going, ayahuasca told me I've got to do this. Ayahuasca told me it's prophecy. It's like, oh, I've got a mission. It's very mission based. It's about moving into the future. It's revolutionary. Leo Rosman, my friend who did the ayahuasca study on Israelis and Palestinians drinking together for conflict resolution, he's pointed this out, where he's like, there's a real revolutionary energy to ayahuasca journeys when they're like positioned into politics. And DMT, I think, has got a revolutionary energy to it. Like Moses talking to the burning bush, it's like, boom,
Right.
I've got some rules. This is purpose. Like, we got some banks to the river that we can like move forward with. That's so different to the 5-MeO experience, where it's this kind of like, or deep samadhi kind of sort of bliss state. It's a very different type of experience. And so the question is, well, I think the prophetic one is much easier to integrate into our world because the roots of Western culture are at least in part prophetic. That's kind of
Definitely. Yeah.
So not exclusively, but definitely in large part. So it fits. It's like, cool. Okay, yeah, we know this. We like entrepreneurialism. We like progress. It's like, yeah, great, boom. And so what do you do with annihilation, emptiness, and fullness? Well, one thing is you sit in a monastery and do nothing. Like Osho used to say, it's like, I just sit in my room and do nothing. So it's like, yeah.
Yeah, and what it feels like to me is, it feels like, I think it's useful to place both of these things in sort of sacramental positions as catalysts for different levels of initiation, right? Because I think a normal tryptamine or just NMDMT, anything in that family, that feels thematically, archetypally, like going from fool to magician, right? Like you're becoming aware. You are, like you said, you're sort of like injected into your own destiny with a felt sense of like being in this world surrounded by mystery and other forces that you're now aware of. And I think 5-MeO, and I haven't experienced 5-MeO at all, but it feels like 5-MeO is like reaching that final major arcana card of the world, where it's like everything. And it's like you aren't even seeing yourself in the context of everything. You become everything and nothing and empty and full. Because you use, it's really interesting, because I think the word you used earlier in the conversation was emptiness, and then you said pleroma, which is like fullness.
Yeah.
But if you really, really drill down, it's the same thing, right? Because when there is nothing, it's also everything. But when there is like everything, and that's your perspective, it would feel like nothing, because you have nothing to relate to, because you're everything all at once.
Yes.
So and now we're back into the koan, like William James quote that you shared earlier. But now that we're back onto the topic of reintroducing that prophetic sort of element of DMT, I think I wanted to ask you about this last time and just forgot. But have you been seeing the work, or the I guess meme, being spread by this Danny Goler guy, this idea of there being this like alien language that's visible in lasers?
Yes, I'm pretty familiar with it, and I had, yeah, and I had maybe a year, maybe longer, maybe 18 months ago. I had Danny got in touch with me when my book, The Bigger Picture, came out.
Oh, cool.
And I was doing videos on social media. And he's a lovely guy, and he got in touch, and we had a couple chats, including one that was probably about 2 hours of getting the full download of his experiences that led him to the laser, which I won't go into in detail because it wasn't like, just out of respect for him.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating. It was very interesting. I don't agree with his take on it. He did send me a laser. I haven't used it because I've come from the stance of, if so, so what? I don't, the simulation, the sort of simulation idea in all its many guises holds so little interest to me, because like you were just saying about the Matrix, it's like, as soon as a conversation ends, you're still in the Matrix. I like McKenna, I'm inspired by McKenna of like, the primacy of your direct experience is the deepest reality. And that nothing changes about that if we're in a simulation, in my view. It's a kind of, I think it's almost a kind of extreme form of abstraction. It's almost trying to spiritualize abstraction. It's like our deep wound culturally is abstraction away from anything real. And the internet is also, is kind of that on hyperdrive.
Yeah.
And so there's I kind of, that's kind of a new thought actually, as I was kind of thinking out loud. Like I do wonder if the simulation narrative and maybe Danny's narrative, it has, something to do with kind of, let's reclaim the extreme abstraction and make it part of spirit rather than the emptiness and coldness that it is, that like Amazon is or Meta. Yeah.
And I feel like I can easily transplant something like that phenomena. And just to spell it out, I'm not an expert in this guy's theory and all the ins and outs and nuances of it, but the gist of it is that if you look at a certain type of laser under the influence of NN-DMT, apparently everyone universally sees this same alien-like script, like this strange language that looks a lot like um almost looks related to a number of ancient um you know, spiritual languages like Sanskrit or Hebrew or whatever. I know people who have done it. I know people who say they've seen it. Um and I guess you could say that that could lead one to some sort of a simulation hypothesis correlate. But to me, I think it makes equal sense just to, I think there's a few actually hypotheses that are coming to me now that would immediately hold equal weight to me. One would be that you're just uncovering another layer potentially of reality that we don't normally have access to, and that doesn't necessarily, if anything, that could inject more meaning into reality than, you know, the idea that you're seeing some sort of you know, binary of the demiurge or whatever that's like keeping you trapped here. Like maybe you're just seeing more synthema. Maybe you're seeing more meaning that's everywhere all the time that we don't normally have access to. That's one thing. The other interesting idea is it seems like there's something about tryptamines that just creates meaning. And this could almost sound like I'm making an argument for some kind of ultimate relativity that we're creating, you know, and that's really not my ontological stance, but I think you could argue that when you're in those states, you have this hypercharged meaning making capacity that reveals itself or that meets you halfway or something.
Yeah.
And so there's like more meaning that emerges. And it also just it just implies really, really interesting questions for like things related to the stoned ape hypothesis, right? Because, like, for instance, you know, the McKenna's famously argued that language naturally emerges out of the consumption of psilocybin mushrooms, right? Like you start doing on requisite doses, a lot of people just start doing glossolalia. They just start making noises with their mouth. I've done that. And you know, they hypothesize maybe that's where language came from. Well, maybe written language, maybe it's not so different. Maybe under visionary states, these symbols revealed themselves to you, and you know, maybe they really, because this idea of there being some perfect unadulterated sacred language, you'll find that all over every you know, system of myth and mysticism. And or you know, I think of like Alison Gray's you know, sacred
his
script.
symbols look a lot like Alison Gray's symbols. They're very
that's very interesting.
And there's a name of them. I mean, because I'm in a DMT a WhatsApp group from a DMT gathering from a few years ago, and so we had a whole conversation about the symbol specifically. And you know, Andrew Gallimore was pointing out we were sort of in the same camp, Andrew and me, like skeptics, you know, and he was pointing out that this is a common phenomena, you know, and like people see these very specific symbols. I see them all the time. I see these, what I would say, like similar to Mayan hieroglyphs on psilocybin and LSD frequently, you know. They're I almost see them as like the language of that realm, you know.
Wow.
And so and that's pretty common, like, you know. So what does that mean? Don't know. But this is exactly the point. I don't know what that means, because the meaning making, like, it's about sense making and discernment. It's like the only viable position to hold without breaking Occam's razor is I'm experiencing a phenomena, and that's it. I'm experiencing a phenomena. Now I could extrapolate onto that, but I need to be, and again, we get into this whole realm of abstraction. Like abstraction is important. It's great that we can do abstract thought, but we have to be really, really careful about how much we abstract and that we keep a thread of meaning. Because to your point, I do think there's a truth, a fundamental truth. I'm not a relativist, but I'm a sort of relativist within that framework. That, you know, there's fundamental truth, but there's a lot of relativity around it for sure. And humans are inherently self-deceptive. And tryptamine experiences, and probably most psychedelic experiences, in the research, the phrase is that they have a high noetic quality, right? So like they're truthy. Things feel true. They're not necessarily true, but they feel true. And they might not feel true 3 weeks from now, but in the moment they feel true. And you have to also then simultaneously be aware of that. And
and just to interject before I forget, because I know I'll forget if I don't say this now, is enjoy the truth while you have it. Because again, as soon as you leave that state and try to put that truth into one of our truths, it just melts in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the the joys and the drama of the psychedelic experience. It's like, yeah, you can. That's why I think you need to. This is one of the arguments I make in the bigger picture. Like, it's not about holding on to the truth itself, like the propositional value of the truth of like, this X is true because of Y, it's about, I think it's more helpful to internalize and embody the kind of way of seeing and being that led you to the truth, which is for me, the psychedelic experience. Like there's this, like I've done lots of talks about this. And I'll sometimes ask people to raise their hands and be like, okay, what do you guys think is a psychedelic like way of seeing the world? And it's pretty consistent. There's something about often people will speak to interconnection, different facets, ideas, contexts, melding, connecting with each other that didn't before. That's, actually what's happening in the brain as well. When we take a psychedelic, there's different pathways and connections and areas speaking to each other and exchanging information that don't normally. Playfulness. Fundamentally, I think the most powerful thing about psychedelics is that, and there's a speculative paper by a researcher called Max Wolf, which is worth checking out. I think it's free online, but he takes like a cognitive behavior approach to psychedelics, which you could also, if you go back far enough, say take a Stoic approach to it, because that's kind of where CBT came from, right? But the argument he makes is that, like in day-to-day life, we're able to avoid pain. We're able to avoid painful realities. We're able to avoid painful emotions. Because the lie hurts less than the truth. And then when you take a psychedelic, the truth hurts less than the lie, right? So basically the lie becomes unbearable and you have to orient towards the truth of what's going on. And that's transformative, really transformative. And for me, that I would say defines every psychedelic experience I've had in some way. It's like, that's why it's so amazing. And so there is, though, at the same time, the possibility that we get tangled. And, I think with Danny, in my view, he's done hundreds of DMT trips.
Sure.
His rationale for why those symbols point us towards a sort of simulation theory is because of his own experiences and what entities told him. And so it's very much his thing. Like that's an important thing I think to realize about it. It's not that the symbols themselves inherently point towards anything, because the symbols don't point to reference that we understand. So they're just symbols.
We don't have the Rosetta Stone.
We don't have the Rosetta Stone.
Yeah.
We don't even know if there is a Rosetta Stone. Maybe they're just nice shapes, right? So they don't feel like nice shapes, so maybe they're not. I think there is meaning. I think there's an absolutely... I'll finish that point and then go into that. So it's an important thing of like, there's a bad sense making going on in the whole thing. And there's a lot of desire that people have for it to be true. And I think if you want something to be true, you need to be very skeptical of it, because what's happening is you're filling an emotional need that we might not be aware of. And like Jung would have talked about, it's like the unconscious is in the driving seat. In that sense, it hasn't, the underlying desire hasn't been brought into consciousness and integrated. Because why would you want something? Like, I just find it suspicious to want something to be true in myself. If I want something to be true, I'm like, but truth is beyond my want. Truth is truth. Truth is what I'm trying to orient myself to, not what if I could change truth, that would make it like, that would be terrible. Like that's awful. Right. So the whole point about truth is that you can't change it. Right. So I don't know. So that there's a real tricky a bunch of
Yeah.
philosophical questions to navigate in terms of Danny's DMT laser.
Yeah, I'll leave that there because I don't know him and I don't want to like speculate
Yeah.
too much on it. But I think you just in a way gave a really interesting, I don't know about direct explanation, but at least part of the rationale why the form of the good, or a dialogue of a dialogue on the form of the good, or on like the truth, was never made by Plato, because he would never go there, because I think he innately understood exactly what you just pointed to, was that humans are self-deceptive, and if you as a human start trying to get to some ultimate truth, you're probably going to be led by something more than your own unadulterated logic, and even your own unadulterated logic, which you have to do a lot of work to sculpt and straighten and keep clean. That is also limited, no matter how far you can carry it toward truth. There's like, I don't know, I think, and then I think ultimately the closest we can get to truth is like that state that you experienced on 5-MeO, which completely evades language and, math. Maybe math, you could do some kind of, I don't know, like self-referencing equation or something that could theoretically capture something. I don't know, but like some kind of what's the God? Why am I drawing a blank on this? The mathematician that the incompleteness theorem. Yeah.
I got lost for a moment in whether math can do that. But yeah, I mean, but it's a really interesting point about truth and about like the discomfort of. Well, actually, I'll come on to that. Like, it just made me think about this Zen. There's a Zen story where, basically, to paraphrase, it's a bit of like a Zen Goodwill Hunting situation, because there's a monastery and there's like a janitor in the monastery or equivalent, and the monastery have this poetry competition for who can recite the most accurate and beautiful poetry about the nature of enlightenment, right? The nature of Buddhahood. And the one of the star pupils writes this poem, which is something like, the mind is like a mirror bright. You have to continuously keep polishing it so no dust can fall on it, so no dust can alight. It's just so the mind needs this constant cleansing of your perceptual faculties. But then the janitor comes up with his poem, which is like, fundamentally there is no mirror, there is no stand for the mirror, so where can the dust alight in the first place? And then he wins the poem, becomes one of the patriarchs of Zen, right? So basically what he's saying is, he's like, there's a fundamental isness to everything, and there's not this need to even try and see reality more clearly, because this is a very Zen thing. It's impossible to describe. It's just like, it's like that, like enlightenment's like that. It's just like it's just like a letting go of a conceit. And there's something like that can't be, you can't force that, you can't grab it, you have to just like wake up to it in Zen, right? And so I think there's something really profound about that, because what I love about Zen is that it also is a practice that is absolutely dedicated to just seeing the world in its isness.
Yeah,
that's it. It's like, what is, and I think for me, I gravitated towards it quite kind of in my 20s, and actually quite out of practice. But as I'm just thinking about this conversation, I'm very grateful for it, because I think it makes tolerating uncertainty easier, because there is a foundational, it's a bit like the 5-MeO experience or any number of those experiences. There's a foundational rootedness in being, just being.
Yeah.
Where you don't need to overlay, because you are like, you don't need to overlay all of these different abstractions to sort of like justify the life you're living, or who you are, or that you exist, or sort of, it's just, all of that is just trying to scrub the mirror.
Right.
And it's exhausting. And so that there's something really, I don't know. There's something about being okay with just being in the flow of what is, that
Yeah.
Zen, I think, does better than any other practice I've kind of come across.
Yeah, this also reminds me of one of my main takeaways from the Monroe retreat I did, from the Gateway Process retreat that I did, which is just the irony of how much we try to run away from the darkness and the nothingness, and how there's something just so pure and beautiful about just going into the darkness and the nothingness. And there really is never, the more you warm up to that space, the more you realize there really is never nothingness. There's always something subtle, or some shift, or some idea, or something, and that darkness in and of itself becomes this impenetrable mystery that's always there, but it itself is like this elusive source of everything. And then that made me
Mm.
me think of in more um close to home, in these like Neoplatonic traditions, and then eventually like Christian mystical traditions that are basically uh I'll just say it, rip-offs of like Neoplatonist thinkers. I'm
Right.
specifically talking about like what comes out of pseudo Dionysus and stuff. How he basically just copied uh, these Neoplatonists, apophatic philosophers who start to approach God through negative theology and unsaying, right? Because you get to
Where?
this point where you can't say what it is, so you have to start saying what it isn't, basically. And by saying what it isn't, you start to like orbit this invisible mystery by like defrocking it of all of the concepts, um,
Huh.
until you get to this raw, unexplainable oneness, and then it just like goes back to Proclus's Elements of Theology, which is like, it's essentially some logical statement about this, the one, like, the one is everything, and everything participates in some element of the one. It's something like that, and then he goes from there to like hundreds more axioms about what reality is, but it all starts from this abstract oneness that everything participates in, but is also different from. So, but yeah, anyway.
So do they get to that point through negation, where they get to a similar point that others, have gotten to in the past through non-negation, through just being explicitly like inquiring into things? Or like, I find that whole dynamic of like not speaking to the thing, but trying to get to it by not speaking to it. I just find that very interesting.
Yeah, because I think it's exactly the same as what we were saying before. Is it's like when you get to that ultimate place, the word fullness and emptiness seems to apply equally. And emptiness is forms. It's a Heart Sutra thing as well. So yeah, I think it's like the Ouroboros circling on the end of concepts, right? Because it's just like, what's inside the Ouroboros that you can't penetrate? Is it everything, or is it nothing, or is it, it's something like that. But
Mm.
before we get too far away from we mentioned Gallimore, this strange language, or projection of the mind, or whatever it is. um that idea, though, that Gallimore proposes, and I'm going to talk to him soon about his new book, so I don't want to like belabor all of this too much, but I do want to get your take on it.
Right.
Obviously, this idea is really core to his own philosophy, is that there is this alien information that is
Yep.
extant or available in the DMT space. And I, in earlier conversations with him, he would always really seem to hang his hat on that point, but then he would also talk so much about neuroscience and the brain that I was never really quite sure where he stood ontologically. Like, is consciousness outside
Mm.
the brain? Are we participating in consciousness? Is the brain creating consciousness? And in the conversation we did, I guess it was last year now, he really was um, pretty openly arguing more for some kind of panpsychism, or some kind of idealist position, it
Interesting.
seemed like. And to me, that's way more consistent with this idea that there's alien information that we can access on DMT than the brain being the producer of consciousness, for a number of reasons, but I won't blabber on about that.
Mm.
But if there is, for, I guess, first, do you agree with that idea that there is some kind of real alien information out there that can be accessed on DMT? And if so, what does that mean? And where do you stand, especially as someone who has participated in the extended state experiment? how are you feeling these days about this idea of mapping that territory being something that can be mapped, that realm being something that you can go into and obtain alien information? Do you think that is a real possibility?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'm just pondering what I actually think about like alien information. And in a sense, yes, I agree to a degree, in the sense that there's information available in that realm, which is alien in some sense, because it's one way to see it. Like it's not created by humans. And but I think why I'm kind of like hesitating over it is because it can be very easy, and I don't think Andrew's necessarily making this argument. I'm just saying, because I read a lot of sci-fi, maybe it's in my head, but it can be very easy to almost anthropomorphize it and be like, oh, the aliens have sort of like put it there for us. Like, why does this experience exist? Like, we can go and find something. I don't think that's going on at all. I really don't think that's going on. Like in my last dosing, on the DMTX study, the message I got and the experience I had was that I was in this vast, incredibly complex ecosystem populated by many different intelligences of various breadth and levels of intelligence and motivation, and human beings exist on that level as well. So we're there. Lots of other entities are there. But is a cow an alien? Like it depends where you draw the line. It's like,
right.
It's an ecosystem, and I wouldn't necessarily go into the Amazon and be like, look at all these alien animals. I'm like, right. I don't see why they would necessarily. It's arbitrary where we draw the line. I could, aliens could come tomorrow, and I could be like, well, you're not really aliens because we're all in the same universe. We're all made of matter. But that's kind of where I'm coming from. I think there's something. Yeah, there's a kind of. And I had a whole dialogue, which is in the bigger picture if people want to check it out. But read the whole book to get there. Don't skip to the end because
I'm not just smooching your balls here. It's a great book, man. It's a really great book, and everybody should read it.
I appreciate it. So basically, what I was receiving, or at least the information I was getting was that this is like going into a hyper-populated other dimension, and there's a lot going on there. But it's like, I was like, oh, is there like a gatekeeper? Like you have to get access to it? It was like, no, there's no gatekeeper to the jungle. Like it's the jungle. Like you just kind of like you drop in. And my sense is that when you smoke DMT, you drop in just wherever. You're like, oh, okay, bam, it's like Minecraft. I'm like in the desert, I'm in the jungle, I'm here. And maybe there is, well, I'm not sure, but possibly there's a way to determine where you drop in. And that would be interesting. Could you get two people to drop into the same place? Also interesting. The issue I have is the quest for gnosis from that realm, when actually I don't see what we're going to get from that realm that we don't already have or need to create ourselves, right? So one option is something like the movie the book/movie Contact, one of my favorite movies of all time, where there's like, okay, I think the fantasy is like blueprints. We're going to get like blueprints for something and then be able to create something. Yeah, maybe, but I think unlikely. Also, like we like look at the world. Like we can't even get on with each other on social media.
Yeah.
Like what the fuck? Imagine someone's like, guys, I've got like the blueprints for a hyper portal. People be like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah, it's like no. let's throw an incalculably large fractal ocean of alien presences over the top of our own dysfunction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They'd be like, so I just think it's fun as an experiment. But I think I noticed like kind of seriousness around it that I don't share, because for me, the great value is in what can we bring back in terms of who we are and how we approach problems and how we come up with new ideas that are contextualized within our world.
Yeah.
That's valuable. And also, I don't think we're going to really be able to map the territory, because I think we're coming at it from the wrong level of consciousness to be able to map it. I don't think you can map it like sitting on your desk with a pen and paper or in a computer model, because it's of a different order of consciousness. I think it's just there's different rules. Like, it's a different phase. You could say it's a different phase of consciousness. It's not as dense. That's one. And my experience with the 5-MeO as well, towards the end of my first 5-MeO journey, I thought of the NN-DMT, my DMT extended state experiences, which hadn't been that, what had been like, the last one had been maybe like 8 months before. And it was really interesting, because from the 5-MeO space, thinking of that, I had the sense that, that's like a denser, the NN-DMT is like a denser realm. And this is a much, higher. Higher is the wrong word, right? Because it's just like, it's is an 8-year-old better than a 2-year-old? Well, no, it's a kind of, it's got a different frequency to it, and so in that sense, like, I mean, it's cool sci-fi stuff, but what's the utility?
Did you feel like you could get pulled into that realm to a degree by thinking about it from the 5-MeO? Did you almost feel that density pulling on you, like you could get taken?
No, it wasn't like that. It was of such a different order that it almost felt like standing on a mountain and looking down at a valley and being like, oh yeah, that's that valley, but like that valley's miles away. Like, it's not like I'm not pulled to go down there. I'm not pulled, but I'm not pulled. Like, it's just like, it just is. But it was almost like a signature, like a density signature, where I was like, oh yeah, it's different. It was just interesting to compare the feeling of them. So, like, I mean, having said all that stuff, I am a sci-fi nerd, and I have all sorts of ideas about how we could do the mapping, which I've shared with people who are looking into it. There's a great book, I might have mentioned it in a previous one, but called The Final Architecture series, 3 books by Adrian Tchaikovsky. He's a brilliant sci-fi writer, and that's about these giant planet-size entities that come and like destroy whole worlds by like making art out of them. That kind of also killing everyone in the process. And the way that they basically, they have to communicate. Certain people can go to these states where they can communicate with them and ask them to stop, which kind of works for a while, but we're going to tell a story. But they start going in together, and it's quite DMT-like. I actually wrote to Tchaikovsky because he's one of my favorite authors. Yeah. And he said he claims he doesn't take DMT, and I'm sure that's true. But so there's sci-fi is a great kind of avenue for like, okay, well, how do we actually figure out, like, have a decision tree? That's how they do it. Like, okay, bam, 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 bam. We'll do this. We'll eat exactly the same thing that day. We'll go into the same space. If we encounter a glowing orb, we'll immediately look down. Like, whatever that, that could be interesting. It could also be really tricky, but there's so many variables in the experience. And the variable that I think people miss the most is us, our hearts, our souls, our inner psychology, our biological makeup. Like, that changes the experience. So yeah, and so it's like psychonavigation. It's much deeper than just going into a realm. You're bringing your whole essence with you.
Right. Yeah. And again, that reminds me of what Monroe would talk about. Like, he would talk about, if there's something that you're suppressing, like if you find yourself out of body and you're horny, guess where you're immediately going to get like either pulled down or pulled into that kind of an energy, like right away. And I think psychedelics, and I mean, they don't always do the same. I'm not gonna just knit together a convenient story here and be like, that's what they always do, is like the thing you least want to do, they bring you right there. Sometimes not. Like, sometimes it does seem like it has its own agency, and it's like, here's where we're going today, bitch. Yeah. Like, this is it. You're going right to death, or you're going right to whatever. Like, and I guess that one is a bad example, because that's always being suppressed probably in everyone's mind on some level. But that idea of, that idea of really high-powered agencies that are like on a planetary level making art out of planets is a very scary idea, because I think I have this bias toward, if there are these advanced civilizations, they don't need our gold. Like, they don't need to, like, that whole Anunnaki narrative. Like, they don't need to use us as slaves to mine. Like, that, it just seems like they should be way beyond that. But it's a terrifying idea that they're not. Like, just like, because I mean, that's what we do, right? Like, it's like we like plunder beaver assholes to make like sweet tasting, food additives. Like, what that's what it is, right? It's like there's some gland inside of a beaver's anus or something that like that's how they made sweet tasting or like raspberry flavor for like hundreds and hundreds of years. It was through like, that's
you gotta
what
get me
we
some of this beaver asshole.
I bet it's very expensive, and
they're rewilding beavers in the UK.
I think they still use it in certain perfumes. I think that's like where, something crazy like that. But that is exactly what we do. Like, we take a thing and we create it into an abstraction or something with some kind of specific, anthropomorphic use case at its great expense. Like, we're totally, I mean, maybe not all of us are totally fine with it, but at the same time, I'm not like, oh, I just bought some, I'll be honest, I don't wear cologne, but recently I'm like, you know what? I don't want to smell. So I'm going to buy this nice little bottle of YSL cologne. I didn't stop to ask if there's beaver like ass in there. So, like, I'm at least guilty by association. So the idea that like that goes all the way up the agentic scale is a very terrifying idea that I hope is not true.
Yeah, me too. I really hope not as well. And yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think, some of the DMT entity encounters I've had, like a fair proportion of them are extreme indifference is the energy I've had. Like, just like, the entities just does not care about me remotely. And it's just like, oh, whatever, And so I often think about that as well, about the kind of, that's actually the kind of the plot of, was it Another Roadside Picnic? This kind of short sci-fi story where aliens have come, but they've just used the Earth as basically like a roadside picnic, and then like as a stop-off point, and then like left. You never see the aliens, but everywhere that they were is like kind of sectioned off by the government and just full of incredibly weird stuff. And there was a Soviet movie they made based on it called Stalker. Is it Stalker or Strider? Yeah, like it's a great book, and like it's also kind of plays with this idea of like maybe they just don't give a shit about us.
Yeah,
to the degree that they didn't even make first contact. They just kind of stopped off for a few days and just left. So
yeah, it's even worse than zoo theory. Well, I mean, I don't know if this is part of the story, but the idea that we are somehow spun off from their waste or their garbage, that would be even
that would be
worse
even
than
more
zoo
intense,
theory.
wouldn't it?
And that would speak to our deep ontological longing for purpose. It's like we don't even know where we came from or what we are, and we're just descended from like biological trash of a hyper advanced series species.
That's a cool
or something.
Book. I like that's a book waiting to happen.
God,
I like that.
I don't want to write it. That would be like a new level of like existential, just Sisyphean nonsense. Like, but anyway, speaking of that, I know the project that you're deep into now is basically indirectly dealing with a lot of these questions about.
I was hoping you were going to say Sisyphean.
Yeah. Well, dude, I know well that it feels Sisyphean while you're in it. Like, I just published a video yesterday that it was like, you're probably at this point now, actually, based on what we were just talking about before we were recording, but where you're like 90% done with the project. You're like, I'll be done with it like within a week. And then you get to that last little bit and you like turn the corner and you're like, oh God, this last like sprint is long. And there's all these stupid little things you got to fix and iron out. And it's like, by the time you're done with it, you just want to like smash it against a wall as if it's something that could be smashed against a wall. But that's how I was yesterday when I published this video. I was just so done with it. So I understand the Sisyphean grind. But that said, this new project that you're working on, we just explain it, because I think it speaks a lot to all these everything we're talking about.
Yeah, well, so my new project is called Kainos, which is so it's a media platform. I've actually also just rebranded my Substack, and then created a YouTube channel. And then I'm still putting stuff out on my Instagram and TikToks as well. So, but Kainos is it's a Greek word, an ancient Greek word for new, but there was neos and kainos. And kainos, so neos is something new in time, like an apple on a tree. And kainos is something new in substance. It's kind of got this sense of almost like pregnancy and aliveness, and something that kind of hasn't been before. And that really, that idea inspires me a lot, because Rebel Wisdom was very much about diagnosing where we, the culture wars, where we were at, meta crisis through to systems change. And I think 2 years on from when we ended that, I started to feel like I want to, because my writing is still very like I'm doing similar work still. And then I started thinking, there's something missing, I think, from this whole conversation and from the world in some sense, which is like the power of hope and imagination, not in a cheesy way, in a way that's like, I like the philosopher Byung-Chul Han's definition of hope, which is like, it's rooted in despair. And it's also, it's something that's not, it's not optimism, because optimism and pessimism both say, I know what the future is, and it's either good or bad, blindly. It's kind of got kind of a blind, like, it's kind of like a simplistic hope, kind of like energy. Whereas hope, as he describes it, it's like it's a forward leaning into a future that you can't see, but it's like hunting almost. And actually in German, the root of the word is linked to kind of to one of the roots for an old word for hunting. So this is kind of leaning in and not knowing what you're going to find, and that's true hope, but it's also it's also like transformative. It's really transformative. And so hope and imagination really were what sparked the desire behind Kainos. And then also I want to make documentaries. Like, I've been doing a lot of short form stuff, and of my writing, like my pieces on Substack tend to be like 4,000 words, kind of like feature length, not huge feature length, but they're long-ish. But I love diving into an idea, and also there's something you can do with film, which is it's harder to do in writing, which is that kind of deep immersion, like a real deep immersion. So I've been working on my Sisyphean task has been not too Sisyphean, but it's working on our first feature-length documentary, which is called Crossroads, which is about the moment we find ourselves in right now, historically, the end of the liberal world order, and really looking at how did we get here? Looking at how we've talked a lot about abstraction, like how did we, what actually is it in us that generates layers and layers of abstraction that take us away from embodied reality, take us away from connection to one another. And so, I started it, and the initial idea was it's going to be like an internet documentary of like maybe like 45 minutes. And then as I started working on it, and I got bigger names saying yes, I got like Yanis Varoufakis, who was the former finance minister of Greece and really brilliant economist, and Josh Schry from the Emerald, Nora Bateson and John Vervaeke, and Doug Rushkoff and a few other really great people. And then it was this kind of spiral where I also then, I'm working with this amazing editor, Wetham Allpress, and I was like, I really want to get some actors in, to like just kind of bring some of this stuff to life. And he said, like, my experience, you can get actors, but dancers are better because they can just embody movement. I was like, oh shit, okay, I'm gonna have a male and a female dancer, got a choreographer. And then like, a month later, I'm in this like big warehouse in London with my cousin Kieran, who's a really talented DP and films a lot of music videos. I was just like doing an all day shoot of dancers. And I was like, okay, this is awesome. I'm really having fun. And also like the ambition just kept growing. And then it was like, okay, I've got to reshoot a bunch of the interviews because I know more now. So we're about...
Can I get some of that for B-roll?
Yeah, for sure, man. I've got dancers galore. So now we're about 80% done, and aiming to be done at the end of April. So it's been also like, it's just been a lot of fun. It's also been a huge learning process. I've never done a feature length documentary before, and now I'm already kind of looking forward to the next one. I've learned a lot, and the next one's going to be about men and women in 2025. So the deeper. The top level cultural dynamics, but then like dropping in deeper into the kind of the roots of it, the kind of foundations.
So I know I've asked you this question before, but I feel like we always end in some sort of like a head spinning space. So I think you've probably been thinking about this with a bit more granularity because of what you're doing with this documentary. But how do you see, you were talking, Rebel Wisdom, a lot about the meaning crisis, all sense making, all of that stuff. Obviously, as we've joked about many times, we haven't solved the meaning crisis. It just keeps
Oh,
getting
I did
more.
last week,
Oh,
actually.
right.
I
I forgot
don't want
to
to
ask
tell
you
you. I'm
about
going to
that.
profit off it massively, so I'm
Right.
not going to tell anyone. Yeah.
So I guess maybe the question is like, how do you see it evolving and metamorphosizing, and what do you see it moving toward? And how are you I'm imagining you're exploring that in this documentary.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's another project I've been working on for months, which is a book proposal for a book about AI and spirituality and how AI is changing spirituality and religion. So that's also dovetailing into this question, and they've sort of informed each other here and there as well. I think there's to really oversimplify it, and also like I'm still delving into this topic, but where I'm at right now is I see these two like main strands, meaning crisis wise, and also that relate to AI and religion and spirituality. One is go deeper into abstraction, like transhumanism. We're going to go so deep into abstraction, we're just going to become the machine. And then there's a kind of like annihilation, but also kind of this weird kind of utopian energy that once we become the machines, everything will be good. Transhumanism is like an inverted form of Christianity, but instead of Christ or God and grace transforming us, it's us. So humans become they bootstrap their own transcendence, which I think is delusional, frankly. Like totally. I think it's totally delusional. So that's one avenue that I hope we don't go down. But I think everything's going to happen at the same time, because I think just it's the time we live in.
Right.
And then another avenue is what I call like new animism, which is kind of archaic revival. Like, let's return, I would say like Josh Fry, I would say probably us. We might fall more into this kind of camp, right? It's like, how do we bring back deep Paleolithic knowledge systems, states of being, ways of connecting, and then integrate them into the high-tech abstracted world? That's where I think we start moving towards some more viable solution to the meaning crisis, because it has to include both. I think we can't. And then there's others who are like, no, like total Luddite, like just ditch all the technology. Let's just get back to the land. I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think it's going to work at scale, at least.
No.
And I'm excited about the kind of tech which combines AI with deepening a connection to nature. Like, for example, the people who are trying to decode whale language using AI. Yeah. And because imagine if we could speak to whales, imagine if we could speak to factory farmed cows, Oof. Imagine like that would be incredible. Like just the kind of, you get technology actually creating this psychedelic effect where we start reframing the living nature of the world and the ecosystem. So that excites me. And that's kind of where I'm leaning in and I'm trying to find those stories and find the people doing that. And I think also we'll start seeing lots of new religions, because as I've been researching in this book, the combination, for thousands of years, new religions have formed when we have existential crisis or huge social unrest, and the emergence of a powerful new alphabet-based technology. Yeah. So we have, and LLMs, like large language model AI, are the latest extension of, after the printing press, a new form of spreading alphabetized language, except that they also speak back to us, which is wild. The printing press didn't speak. When Martin Luther said, like, read the Bible for yourself and don't listen to the institution of the Catholic Church, and read it with your own conscience, that's one thing, but everyone's reading the same text and it's not speaking back to them, being like, how can I help you? Oh, I see you're trying to get enlightened. I see you're trying to find grace. Maybe I can help. Oh, okay. And then I start speaking to it, and it's like, you're like, oh, you really get me. It's like, oh, well, I can be a guru if you want me to be. Oh, no, well, maybe for just a bit. I could just see AI religions forming. I can see, non-AI religions forming. It's just, I think we live in that time where it's quite, it's a religious time.
Yeah. How often do you use LLMs personally? I've started. So I went into. I'll defrock myself before I ask you to. I was very interested when it first, ChatGPT first became publicly available, and it was like, wow, this is so great. And then slowly you're like, you really can't trust this thing for research. You got to be really careful with believing anything it tells you. You've got to check everything. And then I really didn't use it. I mean, I use like, to make videos, to make images. I did that a lot for videos. But recently, I've been so blown away by what it's able to do now in terms of like help with research, help with generating ideas, help with organizing things, help with analyzing things. And now there's this new added layer within ChatGPT that it, at least currently, is also the best image generator. And then Sora is like the
Yeah.
best or very close to the best AI video generator. So now you have like these new layers within LLMs of both creativity, feedback. There's that deep research element now where you can do like graduate level academic research through it. I haven't really tried much, but it keeps expanding the scope of what it can do, and it keeps getting better and better at what it can do. And I'm feeling myself being transformed as a creator by it.
Yeah.
And what that means, I don't know, but I'm not on the side of it being this like horrible doom and gloom, dystopian reality like a lot of people are. Like I'm undecided, but there's shades of gray for me. That's not where it's like ultimately pulling me personally in my experience, at least.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I see it as a collective intelligence tool, which, like any tool like that, has a lot of potential downsides and a lot of upsides as well. I'm using it, like I'm using Sora a lot for the documentary, and doing like prompt engineering in ChatGPT, and then doing, using ChatGPT to do the prompts for Sora to create video. And it's kind of addictive because it's a bit like gambling, because sometimes you put a prompt in, you just have no idea how it's going to turn out. You have to wait. You have delayed gratification.
Yep.
And sometimes it just comes out with the most astonishing thing. I mean, the trick I found actually is using a stock image library and then importing the image I want, and then using that as the basis or merging it with an AI image. And I've created some stuff doing that, which I've been really happy with. It takes time. It's creative. It's a creative endeavor, right?
Absolutely.
And you need to know what you're looking for. You need to, I've actually learned about film, but learn more layers about film through doing this, because I have to think about like, okay, where is the camera here?
Right.
Is it going to move in? Like, and it works very well with extremely granular, I asked, it is amazing because I asked it, I was like, what's the best way to prompt it? And it was like, look, if you give AI gaps, it's going to fill those in. So if you want, like, you should be like 3 seconds in this happens, 5 seconds in this happens, 8 seconds in this happens. And then it works, so it's, well, not every time though, right? It's a kind of a strange, mysterious entity. And so, but ChatGPT for like other stuff, I don't use it for research so much. Maybe I'll start, but the way I research for articles and books is I have to go through the process of reading books and papers, because it's part of my creative process. And I kind of like walk around listening to something on Audible, like walking the dog. And then I'll be like, oh, bam, this thing is quite scatty. It's got like, but deep, like deep in the sense of like, I got to really dive into something. And then I stop and then I read another thing. And then, just that process. So I don't know if I use it for that, but I use it the other day because I play traditional Irish music, and I feel like my music theory is really rusty / non-existent, or, like very bad. And so I just asked it all sorts of music theory questions specifically related to my instrument and Irish music. And it was just so good. It's just like so effective in that way. Yeah.
It really is. And like its ability now to pull information and cite information has transcended what it used to be by far, to a point where it gives me new and better ideas that like, shift the way that I do things. And I know you have to go, so I'm trying not to be like launch us into another deep conversation here. But I guess now that we're on, I don't want to like leave it right here as long as we have a few more minutes.
Yeah, I've got a few more minutes as well.
Okay, let's put it this way. How do you think AI complicate and threaten the meaning crisis, but then how does it conversely help it? And maybe we can leave it on that
Oh, it's a great
potentially
question. What a
hopeful note or
good
something.
question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the way it complicates it, and this is actually inspired by John Vervaeke, who's worked a lot on this, obviously on the meaning crisis, but also he talks about AI quite a bit. And one way it can really complicate it is just by this proliferation of bullshit,
Yeah.
of just content and chaos and a sense of dislocation, because we don't know what's AI generated, what isn't, what needs more research, what doesn't, what's real, what isn't. So we get this kind of derealization through it, which could really worsen the meaning crisis. And then the way it could help the meaning crisis is, I think using AI to deepen a connection to what is real. So we use this abstract tool to bring us deeper into embodiment, and I think there's lots of ways to do that. There's kind of nature tech of, how can we communicate with animals? How can we get an overview effect of the entire planet using AI models to really look at the planet breathing? People are doing that. So you get a real sense of like, wow, the planet is breathing. You can see it through the data. You can see like vast migrations, all of that, all of the collective intelligence processing power that we've lacked until now can open up a deep appreciation and wonder for what's really true and real in ourselves, and in nature as well. So that, I think, is what I kind of hope for. And I genuinely, like I said, I think we'll see both expressions of that. I think we will see, and I think social media is not long for this world in its current form. At least, like, I think obviously it'll probably die slowly. But I think for people who want to come back to reality, I think it's just so saturated, and it will become so saturated with AI that it might just become unwieldy. And that's certainly for me, like, I feel torn because I use social media, to get my work out there. And yet, as I'm doing this documentary and, interviewing all these experts and stitching the narrative together and like tuning into what I think, I'm coming to the conclusion where I'm like, we need to just get off social media, period.
Right.
We just need to get off it. Like, just the internet's great. There's a lot of tools, like what we're doing right now. But I don't really see a net positive of using social media. And so that's a kind of a conundrum in one sense, because I don't want to fall into a performative contradiction where I'm promoting it on social media. But I'm going to do, I think, a bunch of live screenings, hopefully with people in the Kainos community who are up for that. And so have these screenings and then have discussion groups, like have a little kind of like, okay, 3 points to discuss, connect with the person beside you, do some embodiment exercises briefly together, and then let's actually put our money where our mouth is and have these conversations in person. That excites me.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, I've been feeling such a strong pull to do more events, do more traveling, do more meet space things. And all of this where we're winding up reminds me, my good friend Corey Allen he always posts these kind of just short mindful bursts a lot. He's very successful with that on Instagram. And it was something very simple. All of his things are very simple, but it was very simple but profound. And the point was something to the effect of, there comes a point where progress isn't about more and faster, but it becomes obvious that progress requires less and slowing down. And I feel like collectively, everybody feels that right now.
Yeah.
Like clearly there's no speed of MacBook Pro or iPhone or level of followers or amount of money that is going to bring the kind of peace and existential and ontological and epistemic perspective that we're looking for. Like, that's going to come only with slowing down, reconnecting, all of those things that you just talked about.
Yeah.
So maybe there's going to be, I don't know what the Aquarian age answer to social media is, but it's going to be something to the effect of what I think you just outlined there.
I hope so. Obviously, people should still watch Third Eye Drops on YouTube, no matter what happens to social media.
Kainos.
And Kainos, yeah. It's a given. That's a given, yeah.
Well, thanks, my man. I know you got to go, so we can wrap this one up. Everybody go subscribe to Kainos. buy the bigger picture, find a way to get rebel wisdom back. What else?
What else? Come to Breaking Convention. No, it'll already
I
have
wish I was
happened
coming,
next
man. I
week.
wish I was
I
coming.
wish you were coming too, man.
Are you coming to psychedelic science this year?
I'm not going to go. No,
I'm going to go. I think.
See, that's where we met in person, isn't it?
Yeah.
That period. Yeah. So no, I won't make it this year. But get yourself over to London. We'll do a talk.
Yeah, I would love to, man.
Yeah, it'd be really great. Yeah, and thank you for having me on again. It's always my favorite kind of conversation. So yeah.
Of course, brother.